Viewers of this program understand, of course, that one of the things that we have most focused on since President Trump's inauguration, and really before, because a lot of it was foreseeable, is the onslaught of attacks that are coming from Washington on the core civil liberty rights of Americans, including free speech and the right to petition the government and academic freedom. Seeming every day the Trump administration or the Congress or various officials issue some new order, some new measure, some new law, some new resolution, some new executive order that seems to have as its only goal. And sometimes you think that this is what American politicians do more than anything else, is to protect the people of Israel and the government of Israel, apparently by forcing Americans to give up many of their rights, of many of our most important defining rights. And we've seen that over and over in so many of the laws that we've talked about, including the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. There's a new law, though, that had not been getting much attention until today, when an excellent reporter, Matthew Petty, who's an assistant editor at Reason, wrote about them. He joins us tonight for that article, which is entitled, "Should Sharing Information About Israeli Businesses Get You 20 Years in Prison?" Sort of a headline that answers itself. He has previously reported for the BBC, The Intercept, The Daily Beast, New Lines Magazine, Responsible Statecraft, Middle East, the National Interest, and many others. He covers U.S. national security policy and his interactions with American society and domestic politics, and we'll forgive him for having worked with The Intercept because of how good this article today was. Matthew, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on to talk to us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been a huge fan ever since, the Snowden leaks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let me ask you, makes me feel a little old, but I nonetheless appreciate it. Let me ask you, as I said, we've been covering a seemingly, relentless onslaught of these kinds of measures. And honestly, even somebody who's been around for a while, I kind of can't believe, just from like a PR or perception perspective, that they're just willing, like almost seemingly every day, to unveil some policy or measure that has no real effect on the lives of American people and is really explicitly about Israel. And some of them have been quite radical, quite extremist. We've all talked about them. And so one of the things that caught my attention in what you said is that this arguably might be the most kind of extreme or dangerous type of law of this kind. I think you were talking about regulating boycott, but free speech more broadly. We haven't actually covered this. It kind of fell under the radar, but it was seemingly making its way through Congress, so I'm glad you did. Tell us about the specific background and development of this law and what specifically in it makes it so menacing.
Sure. So the U.S. has actually had anti-boycott regulations on the books since the 70s because the Carter administration, ironically enough, given where Jimmy Carter is today and on his where he was on his politics before he passed basically regulations meant to prevent American businesses from complying with foreign sanctions against a friendly country. And it was explicitly in response to the Arab League embargo against Israel. So if you're an American company doing business abroad and the government asks you to sign a paper that says, I will boycott this third country, then you are supposed to report that to the U.S. government and refuse to sign, which is already, I think, kind of a heavy-handed measure, but this is, a foreign policy measure that Europe has something similar. Ironically enough, European countries are supposed to defy U.S. sanctions on Cuba, for example. And then in the
Can I just interject there to clarify just one thing about that? So in other words, like in that case, and in the 1977 prohibition on these kinds of boycotts, it wasn't enough if you say, hey, I'm going to boycott country X, it wasn't enough to criminalize it just because, say, like some Middle East country also supported boycott X. The idea here is that what we want to avoid specifically is Americans complying with coerced or required boycotts. Like if you want to do business in Saudi Arabia, they're like, yeah, you can do business here. You just have to agree to submit to and comply with this boycott that we want to impose on an ally of the United States that the government itself doesn't support, right? It wasn't like someone in their own discretion or judgment joining a boycott. It was one they were forced to by some foreign government.
Yes, exactly. And you're also not supposed to snitch on business competitors to foreign governments. And, in the 2010s, you have the rise of the boycott, divest, sanctions movement, which the BDS movement, in which Palestinians were calling for foreigners to personally boycott Israeli businesses that are seen as complicit with sort of Israeli military rule in Palestine. And then the UN in 2016 said it was actually going to come out. The UN didn't explicitly endorse a boycott, but it said it was going to come out with a list of businesses that were complicit in human rights violations against Palestinians. And then you see this mobilization by the government of Israel and its foreign supporters to, adopt the anti-boycott measures from the 70s to something that could be used against personal political boycotts or sort of like non-governmental boycotts. And in 2018, they changed it from like just a trade violation to a criminal violation to either boycott or furnish information or refuse to report a boycott request. And this latest bill would have broadened it from foreign governments to any kind of international organization like the UN or the EU, which then could arguably be used to say, well, as you said, it's not just the government of Saudi Arabia saying sign this paper. This is like the UN saying these businesses are violating human rights. And then if the business changes its behavior, the US government can come after them and say, you are criminally liable for an unauthorized boycott.
So that's what I want to actually get clarification on as well, because that's an important distinction. So aside from the 1977 law that was sort of enacted to say to Americans, we don't want you complying with these Middle East countries who are forcing you to boycott Israel, as well as other cases as well, but that was the kind of nature of it. There was this precursor to the one now that you mentioned that came in 2018 under the first Trump administration that Congress passed that was a little bit similar in that it said, we don't want you engaging in boycotts of countries we like if there's some international body like the UN or the EU that also is supporting the boycott. And this was basically for companies, right? So like if you're doing business in the EU or the UN, we don't want you then complying with these boycotts from these other international institutions. So what are the primary changes between that 2018 law, and feel free to talk about the problems with that one if you want, but this much more extreme version that until it got a lot of attention, including from some MAGA people who raised their voices in opposition, seemed to be headed toward passage?
Well, the 2018 law actually did not. So in 2018, they attempted to pass this law that they're currently trying to pass, which brought international organizations into it. All they successfully did in 2018 was add a criminal penalty to the existing anti-boycott statute. So if you sign that piece of paper that Saudi Arabia, for example, is demanding you sign, not only can your business be fined, but you're also can be sent to jail. And again, the violations are not just if you sign the piece of paper. It's also if you furnish information on other people doing business with Israel, or if you refuse to report this demand to the U.S. government. Now, this law that was about to be voted on and sort of got frozen, that was going to add the UN and EU boycotts. And they've been trying to do this for a while. There was an Israeli government strategy memo that they had commissioned some American consultants to write in 2016 when the UN first came out with its blacklist. And the Israeli government consultants said internally, okay, the way we're going to fight this is by getting American laws changed so that the anti-boycott statute can apply to the UN. But every time they've tried to do that in Congress, the bill has died because I think a lot of members just don't want to have to publicly take a stance on that issue, and so the leadership sort of kills it. What's different now is that it's not Democratic leadership killing it; it's Republicans doing that.
And then, well, there's this part about the law, and I'm not sure you were talking about this part, and when you were saying snitching on businesses or telling people about these companies, but one of the parts of the law that I think is already in the 2018 law, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it's definitely in the 2025 one, is that it's not just that you're criminally barred under this pending bill if you participate in a boycott that the EU or the UN or some international group also participates in, but that you're not even allowed to, and when I say you're not allowed to, it could be a crime, publish information that would help other people boycott. So example, I'm a
Yes,
journalist.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm a journalist and I want to a lot of people don't know hey, if I'm boycotting Israel, and there's been zillions of boycotts. It's not like Israel's the first company to be boycotted. In fact, there were very powerful boycotts in the last 6 years against North Carolina and Indiana for their bathroom bill, against Georgia for their voting rights bill. Obviously the big boycott movement, which the Israelis fear most, was the 1980s anti-apartheid activism that also started on college campuses. But the idea here is okay, you want to, divest from Israeli companies until they create a Palestinian state or get out of the West Bank, or you want to, avoid Israeli institutions or companies that do business. Obviously, you have to know what those companies are. Most people don't know them. And then you go to a site that is an official boycott site, or maybe reporters report on that. It seems like this law, if it becomes enacted, would actually criminalize, even if you're not participating in the boycott of Israel, if you're publishing information that encourages or enables others to do so.
So I don't know specifically whether they'd be able to enforce it against journalists, but it certainly would criminalize providing information that to be used in the UN blacklist. That's really what this law was aimed at. It's at the UN list. And again, this UN list is not, it's not the government of some country is monitoring Americans to see who does business in Israel. It's so that they can, snatch them up. It's publishing, publicly available information about what foreign companies are doing in the West Bank with Israeli settlements. And this law is, an earlier version of it specifically mentioned the UN blacklist. This 2025 version of the bill does not, but it's the exact same law. And the Israeli government strategy memo said this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it so that you cannot basically, contribute to this this list that's going around. By providing basically accurate factual information about what these companies are doing in the West Bank. That's another aspect of this I wanted to bring up is, they're not just trying to prevent boycotts of Israel, the country as a whole. They're trying to prevent specific targeted boycotts at Israeli actions in the Palestinian territories. And I think the big example of this was Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company, said in, I think 2021, they said, we are going to continue doing business in Israel. We have a factory there. We're going to sell to Israeli supermarkets, but we're not going to let our distributors sell to Israeli settlements in the Palestinian territories because that we disagree with. And a lot of states, because a lot of states already have their own anti-boycott statutes, basically tried to say, well, Ben & Jerry's, you are boycotting Israel, even though they went out of their way to say, we're not boycotting the state of Israel, we're boycotting a specific Israeli policy.
I want to ask you, I think a lot of people assume that all of this stuff, or most of it, has been coming in response to October 7th and the student protests that were so effectively demonized around the country, where people were protesting, obviously not Jews, but the Israeli devastation of the civilian population of Gaza that we all watched for ourselves. And the reality is way different. Obviously the 2018 boycott law that you were just describing under the Trump administration preceded October 7th by 5 or 6 years. But beyond that, there's this, and I've done a lot of reporting on this, it frustrates me because no matter how much you talk about it, people still don't realize it. I think it's now up to 37 states, but 34, something in that vicinity, that have a law that they enacted that say if you want to have a contract with the state, you're a private citizen, and let's say you're a freelance educator who helps kids with a certain learning disability, but you're not a full-time employee, maybe a small construction company that gets hired by the city or the county to do some reforms on buildings or whatever. It is a requirement of that contract that before it can be approved, you have to sign a loyalty pledge saying that you will not support or participate in a boycott of Israel. You're allowed to support a boycott of literally any other country in the world, including the United States. You can support a boycott of other American states. Because like I said, for a long time now, what Israel has feared the most is the possibility of a growing boycott movement against Israel, because that's what took down South Africa. They succeeded in getting the EU to adopt laws saying an advocacy of a boycott of Israel by definition is anti-Semitic and therefore illegal or even criminal in many EU states. Who is behind this new law, and out of what sort of cultural assumptions is it emerging?
So the sponsors of the law were Mike Lawler and Josh Gottheimer, and Gottheimer is my member of Congress, so I can. I've written extensively. I don't know if it's verboten to refer to my Intercept work here, but I've written.
No, I already said I forgive
extensively
you for
about-
that. And I did a little of my own as well, so I'm not on very solid ground criticizing you for that.
Well, look, there was an article I wrote last year about Josh Gottheimer's war with local high school protesters that I think is worth reading. First of all, because it goes way beyond college campuses. It's against minor children, which is kind of strange. Also, because it's just worth reading because there's a lot of weird characters involved. It's fun. But third of all, I think it does illustrate how a lot of this stuff works. Where Teaneck, New Jersey is a town with a big it has a lot of divides, but it has a big generational divide where the adults that run the town are very staunchly pro-Israel, and the kids at the public high school are not. And, this sort of had existed before. There were sort of conflicts about this going back to earlier rounds of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In 2021, for example, there was a big controversy in the town. But October 7th, I think, in Teaneck, New Jersey, and across the world, turbocharged a lot of these pre-existing dynamics. So you have this big open generational conflict where the adults are suddenly shocked that the kids just don't agree with their view on things. And at first you have this sort of angry mob reaction by people who are just like, shut up, kids, which then sort of turns into a more organized counter campaign, which then sort of activates these levers of government, or it activates organizations that know how to pull the levers of government. And so suddenly you have Gottheimer basically pushing the Department of Education to bring in a Title VI investigation that's a ethnic discrimination against the high school for allowing this protest. And I think, if you sort of ask who is behind it, I mean, there is an organized pro-Israel movement in the U.S. that has been organizing for a pretty long time against the possibility of a boycott movement, and has been learning pretty well, like, what the different levers of power you can pull are, what are the sort of anti-discrimination laws and anti-boycott laws and counterterrorism laws that you can use to sort of draw guilt by association. And it's sort of, I haven't been the most immersed in this. There are other journalists who have covered this a lot better than I have, but I do think that there is a sort of organized campaign, and some of it does come from people who are in touch with the Israeli government. There's a great documentary called The Lobby that was put out by Al Jazeera in I think 2018, and Gottheimer actually was one of the people who tried to get it suppressed. He personally led a sort of letter along with Lee Zeldin to shut this, to punish Al Jazeera, basically. And it demonstrates, you have like think tanks and political advocacy organizations talking to, Israeli government ministries about, well, what is the, what do you guys consider threatening? Let's figure out how we can massage the American political system. And you say cultural assumptions. I think that's a good way of putting it. I think a lot of Americans assume that sort of like the Israel lobby rules by fear or greed or something. And I do think that there is like an element of carrot and stick, but a lot of it works because American politicians of the older generation generally they like Israel on an emotional level. Joe Biden really believes that the U.S. has a duty to like protect the Jewish state. And so they're willing to hear it, and they're willing to sort of do these things. And I think only now that it's sort of become a crisis and the question's been forced on Americans of the younger generation, that has become apparent that like a lot of these measures that they've done in favor of Israel are both exceptional and not necessarily popular, and actually sort of come off as repressive and heavy-handed. I don't think the older people see it this way. I think they see it as like, oh, well, of course we love Israel. Yeah, of course we'll do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like you see public opinion polls over the last 3 to 6 months, and they show an absolutely vivid, undeniable, I don't want to say collapse, maybe that's melodramatic, but serious decline in the amount of support for Israel inside the United States across almost every demographic group, including young Republicans, or using young in a very generous way, Republicans 50 and under, a majority of them now say they disapprove of Israel. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.